couldn't sell his soul. The tiger in my tank is going to go extinct, and I'm not feeling so good myself. I think I'm on the brink of disaster.
Once again, we will endeavour to remain upbeat while cataloguing and critiquing stories that are anything but uplifting. People often ask me is the most pompous way you can begin an introduction to a radio programme. People often ask me whether there are days when you struggle to get your dander up, where you think this unending, this unceasing catalogue of catastrophe, camouflaged for the main part still by ludicrously unquestioning tribal or political loyalties, becomes dispiriting or depressing. And the weird thing is, it doesn't. I've got the great pleasure and privilege of talking to you every day, whether you enjoy it or not. And I've got a cracking team of colleagues, and I've got a deep fascination with the way that the news reaches people and the psychology of our response to the news. I like understanding things. So there are never really days where I'm tempted to throw my hands up in the air and go and move to a remote croft on the Isle of Skye and spend the rest of my days looking for otters. I've always wanted to see an otter in the wild. Have I told you this before? It remains one of the only ambitions I've got left, to see an otter in the wild. I really would love to. Don't tell me about sanctuaries and zoos. I've seen all the otters in captivity you can shake a stick at. I'd love to see an otter in the wild, just once. 10:05 is the time. And yet, there are challenges involved in essentially serving up sometimes. Coronavirus was probably the most testing example of this. Serving up essentially the same meal every day without everybody getting bored or without it getting repetitious. And slightly allied to that, how many times can you point at a Prime Minister and wonder what it is he is actually there for? We've come off the back of the dreaded B word. We're now beginning to see that everything he told you about that was wrong, untrue. I don't think Project Fear works anymore, does it? It's Project Here. The only question is how long for, and how much worse than things were before will things be forever? How much of it can be mitigated? How much can things be fixed? And if you think petrol and lorry is the end of it, I've got a bridge I'd like to sell you. And then you look at the catastrophe of the coronavirus handling, and again, you think, how many days can you sit here and say, what does he actually do? What is he actually for? What's the point of the Prime Minister? Who is in charge? Where is the clarity? Where is the leadership? And today is one of those days, actually, because I did a double take at one front page. And as you know, I find myself leaning increasingly towards what we would call the right-wing newspapers, so that nobody listening can sort of console themselves with the thought that this is all coming from some mythical left-wing media empire. And it is indeed the Daily Mail. Boris in a battle to save Christmas. Pardon? Boris in a battle to save Christmas. Boris Johnson was last night battling to stop Christmas. You know he wasn't. You know that he was sitting in front of the telly picking fluff out of his belly button. He wasn't battling to save Christmas at all. Seems unlikely, at least. After days of panic over petrol stocks, he said he was working on the necessary preparations to get the UK through the festive season and beyond. Maybe he was. Maybe we're doing him a disservice. But it seems unlikely, given that there's been a week of this now. I misspoke in that little taster that I drop into the last 15 minutes of Nick's show. I said, imagine you'd been asleep for a fortnight. It's a grave error. You'd only have to have been asleep for a week. You could have fallen asleep last Wednesday, more or less at one with the universe. Certainly at one with your petrol tank. You could have woken up this Wednesday thinking, what the flip has happened? What has happened? They're calling in the army? There was a time in this country when calling in the army was a last resort. Now they call it in for floods, they call it in for COVID, they even called it in for the Olympics. That's not what I signed up for. I don't imagine many troops are thinking. And according to my figures, there are approximately 150 drivers on standby or on crash courses to get the requisite qualifications. And there remains an overall shortage of 100,000, but don't be too misled by that. It's an industry that's never at full capacity. One just wonders whether 150 emergency army drivers are going to touch the sides of the current crisis, because the current crisis is getting worse as a result not of a shortage of lorry drivers, but of a shortage of common sense. or a shortage of, what would you call it, confidence, perhaps. And I would add now, confidence in government. I couldn't quite believe my eyes. You know when a story becomes real life? You know, you hear something on the news, you can watch something, you can listen to something on the radio, you can read it in the newspaper, and then you actually encounter it. And it just changes. The facts haven't changed, but somehow the feeling changes. So I mean, I landed right in the middle of it this morning. I travel mostly by public transport. We're not a big car family. So on the previous days when we talked, I got all the way to Stockport and back yesterday without really encountering anything that could be described as the petrol crisis. A taxi driver who picked me up at Stockport station was quite relaxed about things, but he always has a full tank. So whenever he sees a petrol station that isn't rammed and chocker when he's out doing his job, he just pops in and tops up. So he never falls foul of the 30 quid limit. And he's just, anyway, he's made it work. He hasn't panicked and he's stayed on top of things. I'm not suggesting that everybody who has panicked is wrong or foolish, but the first-hand eyewitness accounts of the current crisis I've taken entirely from you, until weirdly this morning when I won't bore you with the details, but I overslept, so I prevailed upon Mrs. O'Brien to drop me off at the station this morning, which meant a quick tootle up the A4, and it was like it was a car park. You know, it was like there was an Insulate Britain protest at the Hogarth roundabout. And we sort of, that's very odd. Traffic's been quiet. Like, I thought it couldn't be, could it? And you get to the petrol station and there's 10 cars backed up out the back. Half of it's closed. There's only one lane, so 2 out of 4 pumps are out of action, or 3 out of 6. I couldn't quite count. And I just thought, this is mad. This is absolutely bonkers. It was last Thursday that I sat in this very room before this very microphone, probably with a different muff. We changed the muffs for sanitary reasons during the current coronavirus crisis. But I sat in this very room before this very microphone saying these very words. Don't panic. And then pointing out, of course, that the fact that day the Times had a front page that said Downing Street says don't panic would have precisely the opposite effect. A couple of speculations from Monday's show. I saw Ed Davey, who was Energy Minister when do you remember the last fuel crisis caused, I think, by a blockade at an oil plant somewhere in the southeast? Farmers were very unhappy. Forgive me if I've got the details slightly wrong, and I'll dig this out for you before close of play today. Ed Davey explained that he wanted a media blackout on it. So this was during the coalition government, remember, and Ed Davey was the Liberal Democrat member. I think Francis Maude was the Tory who was telling people to go out and fill up their jerry cans. Probably the single worst thing you can say in a crisis, except don't panic, probably, although I guess they're interchangeable. Whereas Ed Davey said, let's have a media blackout on it. Now, I was speaking semi-facetiously, if that is a thing. I was speaking semi-facetiously on Monday when I said, what if they'd not told us? What if the media hadn't reported it at all? So what did you have? 20 Esso stations shut? You had, I think, 200 out of 2,000 drivers short in a sector that's always short. It's never at full capacity. It's just the difference between an emergency and, if you like, a managed shortage. And obviously being in the single market makes that incredibly easier to manage. But I'll explain that to anyone who needs it explaining a little later in the programme. But I was half joking. Why didn't you say half joking? Why do you have to say semi-facetiously? It's like you're addicted to syllables. I was half joking when I suggested that the newspapers... Actually, no, I was 3/4, 52-48. I was 52% joking, 48% serious, when I said the newspapers shouldn't report it. And it turns out that is actually what the government policy was, I think, in 2012, when a fuel shortage was caused by the blockade of an oil plant. So that is part of the problem as well. And I know that some of the polling says it's all the media's fault. How can it be the media's fault? Well, how can it be this bit of the media's fault? If I am sitting here saying to you at 10 o'clock every morning, listen, if everyone behaves, there won't be any crisis. If everyone calms down, there won't be any shortages. If nobody panics, there will be no reason to panic. But at some fascinating psychological point, panicking becomes the logical response. So panicking is the illogical response to data. I'm going to get this right, and I'm going to sound clever if it kills me. Panicking is an illogical response to the data. That takes us back to last Thursday, right? Panicking, here is some data. In this case, a relatively trivial number of petrol stations being closed as a result of problems with supply. Not with reserves or amounts, but with getting it from A to B and C and D and E. So they shut down a few. The illogical response to that data is to pile to your nearest petrol station and queue up for up to an hour because you're so determined to fill your tank. So the illogical response to data is to panic. And then you reach this point, which we tried to explain, I think, on Friday, certainly on Monday, where the logical response to other people's illogical response is to behave in exactly the same way that the people who had an illogical response to the original data are behaving. So the gap between the logical and the illogical becomes meaningless. It becomes invisible. It becomes impossible to navigate. Because if enough people respond illogically to the available data by panicking, then actually it becomes logical for people who didn't respond illogically to the original data by panicking to panic, in a sense, about the number of people panicking and think, well, I better fill my tank up. Which brings me back to the text, which I thought would be the one. There's always one contribution to the programme that stays with me, that lands harder than all of the others. And oddly, it was a text on Monday from a gas engineer who had been almost chuckling at everybody else's overreaction from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday night he thought, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to go to work tomorrow. I haven't got any petrol. That's the pivot. That's the point. Unbelievable. 10:15 is the time. Julie says it would be a dangerous path to suppress information, but they did it in 2012 and they averted the scenes that we're now seeing, Julie. So there is a pragmatic argument for it. And they're not suppressing information. They're just not shouting it from the rooftops. You put a ban on it. You tell the newspapers they're not allowed to report on 10 petrol stations being shut. They're going to do it. Just keep it on the down low, as the kids used to say. Keep it on the down low. Keep it on the never, never. And none of this would actually be happening. Anyway, that's my two, Penneth. What's yours? It's 10:15. The phone lines are open. 0345 6060 973. Pretend I've been asleep for a week, okay? And tell me what's happened. How has this happened? I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, James, there's no earthly way I'm going to provide a more scientific, intellectual and compelling analysis than your own. But don't be so hard on yourself. Of course you could. What has happened? 0345 6060 973. But here's the question, and I think looking at the mess being inflicted upon the country once again by the people who are officially in charge, I think we can do this. I don't normally like doing this as a phone-in, but I wonder whether I'm going to have to change my views on there. I say, what would you do if you were in charge? And normally, because I'm a big fan of experts, I said, what's the point of asking? I nearly said Doris then. God, that was close. What's the point of asking Norman in Ongar what he would do instead? He's got the qualifications of, I've got sofas with more qualifications than him. But now that the people in charge, certainly in some cases, seem to have the intellectual calibre of a piece of second-hand furniture, I don't think it is beyond the wit of man. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that when I say to you, how would you deal with this now? Because they're talking about it going on for a month. They're talking about bringing in the army. Police chiefs are worried that their officers are going to be drafted in to stop forecourt disorder. We've all seen the little viral clips and scenes of people getting leery in queues and kicking off. That's only going to get worse. So I've put you in charge. What would you do? 0345 6060 973. So there you go. Two very simple questions at 17 minutes after 10 on this rather chilly Wednesday morning. How did it come to this? Imagine I've been asleep for a week. I turned in on Wednesday, shut all the curtains, turned off all the clocks. I woke up today. I thought, what the hell has happened? 0345 6060 973. And if you were in charge, drawing on experience or simply drawing upon your galaxy brain, if you were in charge, how would you fix this starting now? And how did we get here? And how did we get out of it again? 0345 6060 973. Chris is in Weybridge. Chris, what do you reckon?
Well, I think it's a complete disaster. I mean, I actually live in France.
Are you in Weybridge at the moment?
I'm in Weybridge at the moment,
Right,
and
okay.
I can't believe what I'm seeing. It's
Right.
absolutely crazy. Can you imagine coming from France? We've got no fuel shortages. We've got no shop shortages where there's stuff in the, and I come to the UK and I see this. It's a
In the
disaster.
interests of balance, I have to point out that pro-Brexit individuals who don't understand anything would now point out that they've seen some numbers somewhere that say France actually has driver shortages as well. Chris,
Okay, right. Let's get that into perception, shall we?
Well, I don't think we need to. This is the James O'Brien programme.
No, I'm
I
not
think those
talking
people fled this show years ago. But yeah, go on. Put it in if you want to. Put it into perspective if you
Right,
want.
very quickly.
Yes.
I mean, if you look at Germany, let's just use Germany, not France, for a moment. You've got 90,000. Sorry, in the UK, we've got 90,000 vacancies for HGV lorry drivers.
Yep.
In Germany, they got 45,000.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
They normally have 35,000, so they got 10,000 more. Why have we got 90,000? Where's it gone wrong?
And we're not in the single market, which means that the drivers who are currently plying their trade in other European countries can't just.
And would you see? I mean, can you think? The government coming out of Downing Street. I've never heard so much rubbish. I mean,
Where have you been? Where have you been? They've been in since 2019.
No, I mean, it's rubbish coming out of it. We came out of the customs union. If you were a lorry driver in France and they said to you, come on, you come back to the UK, 5,000 of you to Christmas, would you come back? Yeah, no chance. Absolutely no chance.
However, I still think, and I have actually found, believe it or not, the little bit from Ed Davey on what happened back then. Francis Maud told people to fill up jerry cans. I said there should be a news blackout. Let it fade. Let people not think anything is going on. Keep everybody calm. And we managed to get back to near stability. So there was a panic. There was a bit of a crisis. But the way they dealt with it was by throwing water on the flames, if you pardon the pun, rather than petrol. So the question of, you know me with the B word, I'm perfectly happy for you to cite it, but in the short term of I've been asleep for a week, or as Paul in Bedford suggests, if you want people to describe something you are trying to comprehend, James, you should say, explain it like I'm John Redwood, suggests Paul. So explain it like I'm John Redwood, starting last Wednesday, not starting in 2016.
Well, the media blew it up. The first thing that blew it up was the way in which the government announced the problem. I mean, I can only compare what I've got in France.
Yes, of
because
course.
that's what I'm seeing. Okay, and the French are very aggressive to their government. Okay, and
the Gilets jaunes, not long ago, were the embodiment of that aggression, weren't they?
If the French feel something's wrong, they will blockade. They will go for it big time. All the way through. All sorts of stuf. How the UK gets themselves out of this, that's a different issue altogether.
Any thoughts?
Return to the customs union.
No, you can't have that, can you? Not at the moment. I just worry about how much of these conversations moving forward are going to be underpinned by that sad knowledge, but that's not going to happen. So what are you going to do?
Don't you believe that?
Not in the short term. Not in the short term. Not until. Look, I mean, it's regardless. Doesn't matter what I believe or don't believe. Until the Labour Party. Until they don't have to apologise. Until the Labour Party actually offers it up as an electoral alternative, it's a fairly meaningless conversation, isn't it? Until it is actually.
No, I believe that there are discussions going on between government and the EU at the moment to return to the customs union under a different disguise.
Well, I said in 2018, if we called it the Union of Customs,
correct,
they probably wouldn't notice that we were still in it.
Exactly, and that is going on. There's much wider things. I know I'm not going off beat here.
Well, you are, but it's perfectly enjoyable.
There's something called UK CA mark, which is a replacement of the CE mark, and that mark has fallen foul in the UK,
Yes.
Now, the only way out of it is to return to CE, and we are going off.
And this would be, this is regulatory alignment of which you speak, which remains garlic to the vampires of Brexit. Chris, I'm cracking on, but only because there's so many people waiting, and you had a good old crack of the whip. Perfectly happy to let people veer off course for a bit, given that to get cross with people for doing that would be a classic case of pot kettle black. Kevin is in Pulborough in West Sussex. Kevin, what have you
James.
got? Hello, mate.
Yeah, hiya. So if you were asleep for a week and I had to explain it, I'll say there's.
Well, no, we've changed it now. You've got to pretend I'm John. You've got to pretend I'm John Redwood. So it's got to be even easier. It's got to be even simpler to understand.
John, are you sitting there with your fish for a start?
Well,
your happy fish.
No, we can't do this. I'm James O. Brexit, and even I don't want Brexit to be the answer to every one of these questions.
No, but there's been a spike in demand. Fundamentally, we're short of drivers, and unfortunately, whether we want to use the word or not, it's caused by the removal of freedom of movement, removal of the customs union, and we actually have a check on this because we can look at Northern Ireland, which still has it, and there doesn't appear to be the same problems with supply.
Is that right?
Apparently so.
Well, someone will correct you if you're wrong, because someone there will be listening.
I'm
Ronnie,
more than happy to be corrected.
Oh, well, we all are, aren't we? That's a default position these days. Ronnie in Kent says, who would have thought that ending free movement of people and free movement of goods would lead to a shortage of people and a shortage of goods? Strange, that. All right, but I mean this now, and this is partly for the benefit of the tape moving forward. I want the explanations going back to last Wednesday. So it didn't have to be this bad. You're quite right to point out the infrastructural reasons for this. The B word is the biggest, but also failure to address many of these issues over all of that is a given. But what should the government have done differently? Because in a way you let them off the hook by saying it's all down to Brexit. It's as if there would have been no point them doing anything differently starting last Wednesday.
Yeah, okay. So starting last Wednesday, there was a spike in demand caused by a leaked report saying that there was shortages and shortage of drivers, and the Brits, in their true Dunkirk spirit, decided to. So how would
you have handled that differently if you were in charge?
We are where we are. So yes. I think now, it sounds rather radical, but I would actually close petrol stations for the weekend.
Right.
I'd let them fill up as much as they can. And I would say if you have a car with a 0 number plate, you go in on Monday, and a car with a 6 number plate, you go in on Tuesday.
Blimey.
And I think, in a very short term, it's a partial answer.
But what about, what about key workers? What about people who've got medical emergencies? What about, all the cliches that get wheeled out when Insulate Britain are blocking the road? What happens to all those people?
So what's a key worker? Where does a key worker start? Where does it stop? And who's going to police it? Two very simple questions. And I think until we answer those, we can't actually prioritise anyone.
All right, well, doctors and nurses.
Absolutely. Teachers.
Right, but how are they going to prove that when they get to the petrol station?
Exactly. And who's going to police it?
Oh, Lord. Well, this is your plan. You can't stop picking your holes in your own plan. Who do you think you are?
I'm saying close them. Then I'm saying
close them completely?
0 number plates on Monday and 6 number plates on Tuesday. And that is a very short-term answer, and it's not ideal.
No, but I don't think... you're not going... Well, you're going to the top of the class, but only because at the moment you're the only person in the class. So don't get too big for your boots.
I'm looking around for Boris, but he's hiding in the fridge.
Well, that's the point. He's back in the fridge. Where is he? What does he do all day? What is his plan? Who is in charge? Why are the police worried about having to police forecourts because of the disruption? What would clarity and leadership look like? So shut all the petrol stations, and then sort of ration it based upon registration plate IDs, suggests Kevin. As I say, in the absence of any other explanation, that's the only one we've got, although I don't think I'll be pinning all my colours to that particular mast at this point in proceedings. The word from Northern Ireland is that he's right and that they are not currently... Well, I say the word. I've had 4 texts saying, no, we're in Northern Ireland, James, everything's grand. You can tell they're from Northern Ireland because they said grand, you see, rather than great. 29 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Coming up later in the programme, we should be taking Keir Starmer's first in-person speech to the Labour Party conference since becoming leader live. There's a little bit of an update on that story of the neo-Nazi who was sentenced to read books. Despite having been found guilty of some fairly grim offences. I told you there'd be updates on that, and I shall have the latest one for you later in the programme. And, we talked about the lorry drivers, we talked about the petrol. We're probably going to have to talk about the restaurants and the catering and the hospitality trade because, they're next. How did it happen, and how do we get out of it? And one of the problems is, and I say this with a heavy heart, actually, that when you hear in the news that the situation is stabilising, I think you probably take it with a pinch of salt. I don't know whether that is true or not, and I don't, at this point in this political cycle, have much faith in the people whose job it is to tell me whether or not the situation is stabilising. We did speculate on Monday's show. Thank you for all the lovely, lovely words, actually, about the funeral of my godfather that I attended in Stockport yesterday. I read them all, actually, on the train back, and they put a warm glow in my heart. So thank you. It went off as well as anyone could have hoped for. It was a very, very special occasion, so thank you for that. But back on Monday's show, we were speculating about whether or not there is a sort of saturation point in the panic, whereby everybody who's gone out to needlessly buy fuel whether they were part of the illogical response to the original data or the logical response to the illogical response of the original data. I'm very, very pleased with that. You can probably tell, even more pleased than usual with myself. Would all have a tank full of petrol, and therefore the situation would abate. My eyewitness experience this morning was that isn't yet happening, but I was only driving up one road very briefly. And I mean, I'm hearing from you that other parts of the country are similarly chocker, but that's not necessarily proof that it's wrong to say the situation is stabilising. I still think there is a sense to the explanation of everybody who's panic bought being happy with the amount of fuel they've now got. Therefore, the amount of panic buying will decrease quite markedly. We shall find out in the coming days. How did it happen, and how do we get out of it? Because the permanent solutions are not in place. 03456060973. If you had been in charge, how would you have avoided this? I think, now that I've seen Ed Davey argue that when he was Energy Minister, they did actually do this, I would have used my influence, my clarity and my leadership, had I been a Secretary of State for the relevant issue, or even perhaps the Prime Minister, I would have been putting all of my energies into dialing it down. Not saying don't panic, but hitting the numbers. And saying, look, folks, 20 petrol stations are shut in parts of the country that you're nowhere near. I am reliably ensured that the problem is not going to spread anywhere else, therefore relax. And then make a few phone calls to the newspaper editors and say, look, just don't go in too hard on this one, lads, because otherwise the whole country's going to grind to a standstill. But possibly I'm being a little naive. 10:37 is the time. Kiri is in Leighton. Kiri, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome.
We've been impacted quite badly. I own a small steel company, family run, and our HGVs were struggling to get diesel every other day, very fuel intensive. And the only solution I could come up with, I've sort of caught the end of your last caller with the 06 number plate and the 01 number plate.
Yeah.
Very simple, temporary solution. If your car is registered to an odd year, you get to go in Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you're registered on an even year, you get to go in Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And on Sunday, up until 12 o'clock...
We chilled on Sunday, didn't we?
Chilled on Sunday, yeah. But, people are still going to need to fill up, emergency services to get their time to fill up until 12 o'clock, and then we'll have a free-for-all just for one afternoon of the week instead of the whole week. Listen, the government, they spend a lot of money, but surely they're going to have some sort of logistics in place where they can work out how to split the population in half.
But then, do you know what I think I would do, Kiri? I think I've got an even-numbered car, and we've got half a tank at the moment. I don't really need to go out, but if you did that, I'd probably...
You split the demand right in half.
Yeah, but I think I'd go out on an even day, even though I'm not going to go out on a normal day.
This is something that people disagreed with me on when I discussed it.
Is it? So they've already spotted the flaw in your plan?
What I wanted to say is, if you're an even number car and you want to go on an odd day, if that's what you're saying.
No, I'm not. I'm saying I wouldn't go on any day now. I've parked it up for a week. We don't need it until next Sunday.
Only the people that need to fill up will go out.
No, but I would go out on an even day. I don't know why. I just would. I'd be like, I'm going to go out on an even day because Kiri say the queues will be shorter. He sounds like he knows what he's talking about.
There has to be a way to split it in half or cut the demand for certain days.
What you need to do is to say supply is now completely back to normal, so there is no more reason today to go out and buy petrol you don't need than there was last month or last Wednesday.
But then nobody would believe that. Everyone takes it with a pinch of salt, like you were saying earlier. It's a very difficult thing to solve.
This is like the 7 circles of hell. Everywhere you turn, there's another problem. They get one solution, you chop off one head, and two more grow back.
You have to try something. I'm sure if we were to give that a go, it would instill some sort of confidence in people. Say, hey, there's a guarantee I can go on that day.
Key workers again. I know you won't know unless you try, and it's probably better than this. But you're working on the presumption that this is going to carry on in the current status.
I know
you hope it doesn't, but you're not seeing a lot of clarity or leadership.
I've got people struggling to come into work. We've got people saying every other day, how am I supposed to meet my clients? My friends are telling me they're personal trainers. They go out on site meetings, all different types of work. Yeah. They can't even get to where they're going because the tubes are getting packed now because everyone's trying to avoid taking their cars.
That's why I'm so slow on the uptake sometimes. That's why the the tubes were so packed this morning, isn't it? Partly. Did you say you're in the HGV? You're a haulier. Did you say that, or did I mishear you?
Not me personally. We have two HGVs and we've got 3 light vans, and we're all over the place all the time.
So, and that means that this could kick on then. So, weirdly, because we're talking about petrol tankers, you have a shortage of petrol tanker drivers, causes a fuel panic. The fuel panic then means that whatever role you fulfil in the supply chain is now compromised, is now under threat in a way that it wasn't a week ago.
Of course. And then my customers are then delaying to people that are doing building work, lofts, etc. And then their lofts are going to be exposed. There's going to be damage to property. There's a lot of things to consider. And that's just, I'm one small part of an entire country with all the business.
We all are. That's incredible, isn't it? All right. Well, again, you've had an idea. It's more than the people paid to come up with ideas have come up with so far. Do you want the good news, though, Kiri?
Go on, then.
Boris Johnson is battling to save Christmas, mate.
He tried that last year as well. Didn't really work, did it?
Well, it's everywhere. I say it's me just trying to bring a bit of positivity to proceedings, and you remind us that last time he tried to save Christmas, we ended up seeing more people killed by coronavirus than at any other point during the entire sad, tragic saga. But hey-ho, doff cap, tug forelock, keep voting for them. Nikki's in Paphos. Nikki, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello, Nikki. What's the score in Paphos? Is it all right, petrol in Paphos? Is it worth me popping over there to fill up, do you think?
James, it's wonderful.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah, I arrived Sunday and I'd had problems towards the end of the week getting fuel in the UK, but I thought, you know what, I'm not going to fill up because I know I'm coming out here.
Oh, off to sunny Cyprus.
Oh, it's lovely. I've got a little boat out here and I haven't been out for 2 years, and I've got my petrol. The supermarkets are fully stocked. Now, this is an island, right at the edge of the Mediterranean, East Mediterranean.
Yeah.
There's no shortages of anything. Now, you posed a question earlier of what would I do?
Yes, I did, actually. Yes.
Would it be, and I haven't been out there, been in the UK for a few days.
Yeah, I know, don't rub it in.
Would it be worse, opening all the petrol stations during the night, allow the fuel tankers to go in during the day? If people really didn't want to go out and fuel up at night, they probably weren't that desperate for it in the first place. Sort of do the opposite of what normally happens? I don't know.
That's either ridiculously stupid or genius. Often the line between absurd insanity and genius is very thin, Nikki. And I don't know which side you're on at the moment. I mean...
I'll tell you what. I'll tell you why I saw it, James. My husband's not out here with me. He doesn't have the flexibility to pop out here. Is
that win-win, or is that a cause of some regret?
It's a little bit of a cause of some regret. But he does work for one of the, I'm going to say, top 3 supermarkets.
Top 3.
Now, I know his one.
Yeah.
They have been starting. We're down in Eastbourne.
Yes.
He does. They have started opening during the night at his store, based on the fact that nobody can get into the store to do any shopping because of the congestion.
And the petrol station blocking up the entrance into the actual supermarket.
That's the
car
one.
park. I hadn't even thought. Oh my days!
It's absolutely crazy.
It's bonkers. Well, I tell you what, it can't be any worse. So your idea is to almost turn the clock backwards, and I mean, it sounds it sounds ridiculous. If this was a Hollywood film, I'd say something like, "My God, Nikki, it just might work."
I don't know.
No, I don't know either.
The fuel tankers need access.
Then they're going to do that. So yeah, but then wouldn't we just? So you think people would be less likely to go out unnecessarily at night, and the only people that would be queuing up if the petrol stations were open from 10 p.m. to 10 a.m., they'd be rammed.
If you knew you needed fuel, you would go out at 2 o'clock in the morning because you knew that you've got to do it. All the emergency services were a 24-hour operation, so their night people would make sure ambulances, whatever vehicles they've got, could be filled up during the night.
Have you got sunstroke? Have you been out in the sun already this morning? Is that...
No, it's a bit early. I'm going out for lunch. I'm meeting a couple of friends who are by our complex. We're going to go out and have some lunch.
Well, a bit of Kolof Keftedes.
Think this through.
Kolof Keftedes.
By the way, it is on the news in Cyprus as well.
Mia Bira Paracalo.
Yeah, it is, but it's just sort of flashes of just the queues. They're not really going into it.
No,
But
they're
they all think
reporting
we've
all
gone mad
over
anyway
Europe.
out
They're
here.
reporting all over Europe how bonkers we are and how crazy the situation is here, which is a bit of a turnaround from the rhetoric of 2015, 2016, when they were supposed to be falling like dominoes now and following our example and marching off into the brave new world of purple fish and sovereignty. Nicky, I hope you enjoy the rest of your holiday. It sounds like you will. I would like nothing more this afternoon than to settle down into a Mediterranean taverna, order some kolokeftedes, maybe a little tarama, a couple of birras. Oh, man alive, that would be nice. But hey-ho, it's how much I love you. I'm here instead, waiting for Keir Starmer's speech. This is quite a good point. Oh, 2 quick corrections. James writes, Parrow, you are questioning the government's statement that the situation is stabilising. It's worth noting that stabilising semantically just means that the position will remain the same as it is now, i.e. not worsen, but also not improve. So maybe the government is being truthful. I didn't hear it like that. I think technically, indeed semantically, you're quite correct. But I hadn't clocked that. And my massive apologies to anyone who speaks better Greek than me. I just misspoke. My friend Alexis has been in touch to point out that I missed a syllable out of the Greek word for courgette or zucchini fritters, which is kolokithokeftedes. Kolokithokeftedes. I missed out the kitho in the middle. Everyone loves a Keith. And I said instead kolokeftedes, which I'm told translates roughly as bum fritters. So my apologies there for conjuring up a Mediterranean idyll with a bit of a horiatiki on the table alongside the kolokithokeftedes, and instead I conjured up an image of your table groaning under the weight of what Alexis, who has a slightly fruitier vocabulary than me, described as arse fritters. So my apologies for that to all Greek speakers listening who've just been put off their 11s. Or not, I suppose, rump. Could you not rump? Anyway, that ship has sailed. Charlie's in Tenby in Wales. Charlie, what made you pick up the phone?
James, how are you? Just a couple of things. How did we get here? Well, here's a bit of a radical idea. Instead of Eds all over the country, rubbing their hands together and coming up with headlines like petrol stations across the country forced to close because of fuel shortage.
But that's after the panic has started, not before. We're trying to nip it in the bud, you see. So
but that's what I'm saying. That was when there were 10 petrol stations shut.
Forced
that was the kind of headline there. So let them. Why not tell the truth? Because that would always be good, and stick it on page 2.
With respect, this is my idea. You can't come on the James O'Brien Experience and nick James O'Brien's ideas and then pass them off as radical and brilliant. That's just. I mean, it's very flattering, but it's a little disingenuous, Charlie.
Well, perhaps I'll write a poem about it.
That'd be nice. Nothing rhymes with petrol, mate.
No. The other thing is, again, is Johnson reacting, not acting.
Yeah, he isn't, though. I wish he would react. He's too busy battling to save Christmas this morning, apparently.
Well, yeah, but he's been talking about the army for how long, would you say? A week? 10 days?
Yeah, well, you knew that when George Eustace said they definitely weren't going to bring in the army, you knew that it was on the horizon, didn't you?
Yeah, but also everybody knew that when the army came in, they would have to be trained. So why not train them before you make the decision? So you kind of go, well, we're thinking about bringing in the army, so what we'll do is we'll train them up just in case, and then they can start today instead of 2 weeks when they're fully trained. And also, finally, I can be your kind of roving reporter because I have picked this week to do a telly in Manchester, a telly in Stratford, voiceovers in London, and have a son that needs to go to Cardiff.
Oh, well, keep us posted.
I've been driving all over the country, and what I can tell you is this. If you have an unleaded vehicle, you are far more likely to get petrol. Because everybody nowadays is using diesel, because the vans are using diesel, the cars are using diesel, the lorries are using diesel. And I've talked to various petrol station owners, and what they've all said is as soon as we get it in, it goes out again. However, it would appear that people who have cars with unleaded are now sort of in the minority. So I borrowed my son's little Citroen C1, and I've been bombing about all over the country and not really having any major issues getting fuel.
So, but you have to queue in the same queue as the people getting diesel to get
Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily. Especially the larger the petrol station, the less chance there is of that.
Okay.
So I've also been on motorways a lot, and the motorways tend not to have the same queues because you have to.
But this is what the taxi driver in Stockport said to me yesterday: is that he just goes about his business and then avails himself of the opportunity to get fuel when it presents itself because he's starting with a full tank, whereas that's different from heading out now, determined to get fuel at all costs. So I think you're right, but you're also in quite a lucky position. What telly are you doing, Charlie?
I'm doing a thing for the BBC called Sherwood, which has the most extraordinary cast, which is about a couple of murders that happened outside Nottingham in the 80s. I'm doing a thing called Shakespeare and Hathaway, which is
I love Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare and Hathaway. I love Shakespeare with Mark Addy in it. It's set in Stratford. Mark Benton. Sorry, it's one of my all-time favourites. That at the moment, and I don't know whether I was off when it broke through or something like that, but it didn't get anything like the attention it deserves. For people who don't know, Charlie is Charlie Dale. You've seen him in Casualty. You've seen him in Coronation Street. I dubbed him the laureate of lockdown when he was writing rather brilliant poems and recording them in a characteristically passionate fashion. I don't want any spoilers, but do you know the O'Brien theory of whodunits on the telly?
No.
The most famous guest star is always the murderer.
That's definitely Midsummer Murders. I think
it's all of them. It's Vera as well.
And the one who does least during the course of the episode.
It's exactly that. So I shall watch that one with interest. I watch both of them with interest. Charlie, it's always a pleasure, mate. Is he there? Sorry, we pressed the wrong button. Charlie, take care.
No, I'm still here. Take care, mate. Bye-bye.
Mind how you go. 10:54 is the time. Oh, I like that. Nick's in Paddington. Nick, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Hello, James. I'm sorry to hear about your godfather.
That's very kind.
My dad did his best, but I love my godfather so much.
Yes.
It's such a big role, isn't it? Anyway,
I was very lucky. Thank you, mate. Carry on.
That bloke's busy, isn't he, travelling around? I've been in Mars this last few weeks, actually. I'm touring schools from Mars, but that's another story. You're asking about petrol.
Yes.
What, why, how? I mean, what is not the question? I think the question is why did it happen?
Go on.
Because we've got a government that's been run by behaviour scientists for the last 18 months. When the government says don't panic, I think they'd have had a good idea of what was going to happen. So I think the question is, why did they do it? Why? Was it because there was a Labour Party conference? They wanted to bury their bad news? So for me, the question is why.
I need you to take that tinfoil hat off for a moment. What you don't do when you're joking, aren't you? The opposition are having a conference, so you manufacture a political crisis of your own making. The missed opportunity that the Labour, but Keir Starmer in particular, has indulged in here is a story. It's quite incredible that they've been, inevitable perhaps given the last 5 years, but the infighting and the internecine warfare that's dominant, letting the right-wing media bang on about cervixes and scum. I mean, all of that is, but there's no earthly way the government thought, let's have a massive fuel crisis that we will be responsible for in order to distract attention from Angela Rayner's speech. Nick, come on.
I'm offended you'd accuse me of wearing a tin hat, James. I mean,
tin foil.
Rayner, let's face it.
Tin foil.
Rayner is a Tory plant. Ange Rayner's a Tory plant to stir up the headlines against the Labour conference.
I hope you're joking. Well, I'm glad you got a chuckle in at the end before the guillotine fell. Because that adds to the suspicion that you might have been yanking my chain. James is in Rotherham. James, what would you like to say?
Right, so I'm an HGV, I'm in the HGV industry, and I'm a transport manager of about 40 vehicles. Now, one of the things that I've found is, like, we're a waste management company, so people depend on us, schools, local businesses to empty their waste. We hold fuel on site. We've had no issues with getting fuel in on site. Because yours gets delivered directly? Yeah, we hold bulk on site. But we have got drivers who are travelling further afield in towards, like, Hull, Immingham, the major docks and ports. Now, when they're going out that way, you've got people, like, going out and fueling the cars up on these main services, even though they're not living in that area. Yes. So you've got people who are just taking advantage of, like, what is there for the main line for the supply chain. Well, taking advantage is an unkind reading of it, but I think probably an accurate one, because you're a little bit insulated from this, clearly, but obviously you've got more skin in the game than anybody else has as well at the same time. But there comes a point where it's logical to panic, because I don't know where the point is, James, but there's so many other people panicking. So I had a gas engineer on Monday who
was not panicking, and he was not laughing, but he was looking quite askance at everybody who was panicking. And then he realised on Sunday night that by not panicking, he didn't think he was going to be able to get to work this week.
Well, this is the thing. This is the problem.
Isn't it?
In my part-time, me and my... I'm in a band. And we play functions for, the MOD. We'll play weddings. On last week, on Friday night, we were like, people are starting to formulate this sort of thing. You see it on Facebook.
Yeah.
There's going to be a fuel crisis. People are starting to go and fuel up. And then before we knew it, on Sunday, we couldn't get any fuel. And we were driving around for 2 hours in Nottingham.
Using up fuel.
Trying to find somewhere to fuel up to get back to Rotherham. So I actually phoned my boss and I was like, look, there's a chance I might not be able to come to work tomorrow, so I might be stranded in Nottingham.
Well, at least if you ran out of money, you could have done some busking.
Well,
so it's not all bad.
Could have probably
What's the name? Do you want to give the band a shout? Do you want to name the band?
We're called the 11X. We're
the 11X,
really. Yeah, the Leather Necks.
Oh, Leather Necks. Oh, I like that.
Oh, everything.
No, I like that. Is that their radio debut? Is that the first time the Leather Necks have got a shout on the radio?
I believe it might be, actually.
Wow, we've made history today, James. There might be a crisis going on, but we will find our fun where we can. Mind how you go. 10:59 is the time. A lot of people still waiting to talk about this, as you would expect. If we do continue this angle to the conversation, I want to steer it in a slightly different way, perhaps have a look at more the fixing of it than the reasons for it. But I'm obviously also looking ahead to Keir Starmer's speech to the Labour conference coming up from 12, and I am keen, either apart from or in addition to the continuing conversation about petrol and haulage, to turn attention to catering and hospitality, where there is a sort of glimmer of good news. But if you'd allow me to remind you that we were warning about the haulage problems months ago on this show, then I do also need to remind you that we rarely spoke about haulage and supply chains without also talking about hospitality and catering. And remember, knowledge is power. Forewarned is forearmed. So I will start with the good news, or potential good news. I have you've probably noticed. In fact, no, we'll start with a little bit of, I don't know if it's housekeeping or yet another attempt to help people understand some of the issues that those political and media figures who have been proved catastrophically wrong about everything at the moment still fail to understand. So I don't know if you've seen the attempt, and I've got to be honest, the newspapers have been pretty good at this now, although some of the columnists and commentators remain. I've just seen something on Twitter about someone trying to blame the petrol crisis on anti-Brexiteers, which is, breathtaking. But the claim that because other countries have shortages, this can't have anything to do with Brexit. You can understand why people want to cling to the carcass of that claim. Of course you can, but you don't really want to be one of them. Nobody wants to be clinging to carcasses when when you could be availed of the proper facts. So, I'll tell you simply that the reason why the shortages of lorry drivers that exist in other countries have not led to empty supermarket shelves or significant disruption is because of the labour flexibilities in the European Union single market. I know not everybody wants to hear this, but that is the view of industry experts, reported in Rupert Murdoch's Times today. The single market allows the European logistics industry to protect itself against the shortages that are causing big supply problems in Britain. So Michael Clover works for Transport Intelligence, a logistics consultancy that operates across Europe. He puts it pretty well. In Europe, haulage companies have more flexibility to deploy labour to add transport capacity. Hauliers can recruit drivers from anywhere within the EU, so can draw on the whole pool of European drivers. Secondly, the geography of the continent and the flow of goods also enables much higher rates of cabotage, which is the transport of goods between two places in a country by an operator from another country, which can top up capacity in countries with constrained transport capacity. So I am often complimented, and I take the compliments in good faith, and I often slightly facetiously boast about all my Brexit predictions coming true, which is grim. James O'Brien Freude, I believe, is what the Germans call it. But it's not a particularly wonderful gift. I'm not particularly clairvoyant. I just still subscribe to a school of thought that says if you want to understand an issue, go to the people who have spent their lives wrestling with it, or who spend their lives dealing with it. I know what you're thinking. Is he going to do the Andrea Leadsom, Pascal Lamy story again? And I will allude to it briefly. The idea, when I worked for the BBC, that having asked a former Director General of the World Trade Organization about what WTO membership would mean, that I then had to have the same conversation with Andrea Leadsom, is a really helpful illustration of how we've ended up in such a mess. So you are more than welcome to listen to some person who's popped up on Channel 5 explaining what is going on from a position of no knowledge, evidence or insight whatsoever, or even someone who's popped up on LBC. Or you go to the people who do this for a living. You go to the experts. And, even if we must return to the B word, you go back to Operation Yellowhammer, which was commissioned by the actual Brexit supporting government and more or less now reads like the description of the current daily situation. So that's all. I'm not Mystic Meg or possessed of any particular insights or skills. I just reach first for experts, which of course was that slightly misreported line of Michael Gove's, which was such a tipping point in the whole sorry saga that has led us to where we are now. So I have contacts now. The experts that I draw upon and have drawn upon have become contacts and in some cases friends. And one of them tells me that this is perhaps a glimmer of hope for the industry, although she also warns me that some of the people who are now signing up to a hospitality strategy council are perhaps taking a risk by allying themselves with the government that has brought the industry to its knees. But people like Emma McClarkin, the chief exec of the British Beer and Pub Association, Nando's and chief exec in UK and Ireland, the head of Green King, various key players, the head of Prezzo, the chair of Prezzo, will be joining a committee with Paul Scully, the business minister, that is addressing particular problems for the hospitality industry. Robin Hudson, Kate Nichols, Alistair Story and Nisha Katona have been appointed to the government's new Hospitality Council to steer the sector recovery, which my contacts tell me is potentially mildly good news. Of course, that's in the caterer. I've told you a few times the trade mags are probably the most reliable media when it comes to the situation that we're currently in, because they didn't cheerlead for or against the big decision of 2016. They simply report what's going on in their industries and what those industry experts are saying. 11:08 is the time. In the Financial Times yesterday, when I was off, obviously, otherwise we probably would have talked about it then, more than 65 hospitality leaders, including the Savoy and Soho House, one of the co-founders of Pret a Manger, Yotam Ottolenghi, Richard Caring, have written to the Prime Minister and senior Conservatives demanding that immigration requirements for hospitality workers be urgently loosened. And that is a story. Not least because they use the phrase close to imploding. We'll speak to one of the signatories of this letter in about 20 minutes' time, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to get in first. It seems to me now, and I want to have this conversation in a grown-up way, it seems to me now that go back to that text, actually, from Ronnie in Kent. Who would have thought that ending free movement of people and goods would lead to a shortage of people and goods? It seems to me now that we are edging ever closer to a national realisation that freedom of movement of people was a really good thing. It is, I think, as much the fault of so-called Remainers as it is of so-called Leavers that the public was not aware of this or not clear about this. You may disagree with that. You may think there are answers to the problems being described by industry leaders everywhere from haulage to hotels, that you have a better grasp of their industry than they do. Or perhaps you're somebody who's spent 20 years following the Tory lead on the dismantling of trade unions, but you've woken up this week and discovered a deep desire to see the terms and conditions and the wages of your average worker improved. Which is it's a bit of a turnaround, but I suppose it's better late than never. Dear James, where is Nigel Farage? Is he driving a lorry? I don't think so. 10 minutes after 11, there's an idea. The warnings coming now from the hospitality trade are huge. And the personnel issue, I should stress, is not confined to the people in the restaurants. One of my contacts tells me that he's already seen 2 directors of multi-million delivery firms out on the rounds today. They're behind the wheels of lorries doing deliveries to restaurants, despite the fact that they're the sort of CEOs and head honchos at big companies. There's such a shortage of bodies who are able to drive lorries that they're now sending out the white-collar workers to do the blue-collar work. I'd stress again, as I often do on this programme, the plural of anecdote is not data. The question I have is what we are going to do and whether or not, because I said to you on Friday that I think now the political climate is such that they could bring in visas for foreign workers and it wouldn't actually be a Brexit betrayal, or it wouldn't actually be held up as evidence that they got everything wrong. Keir Starmer is not landing these punches. He is not landing these points. He has chosen not to try. For whatever reason, he is not using this to make political capital. And therefore, I said to you on Friday, I think the government could bring in special visas for lorry drivers and not have much criticism at all. Unfortunately, they brought in special visas for lorry drivers an hour after our show finished, but they brought them in such a way that they're very unlikely to work because they didn't bring in an attractive offer for people currently living overseas to come here and either resume or begin a working life here. You can come for 3 months, but then you can clear off again. I just don't think that's an attractive offer. You know, not when you're getting a much better offer from lots of other countries. So if you're in hospitality, this is one of those opportunities, and you better hurry up actually, because I've got quite a lot to get through this hour, and then it's Keir Starmer's speech at 12. So give me a call now. Just tell me what the score is on the ground. I'm hearing about restaurants that have been built and kitted out and are ready to open but can't. 0345 6060 973. I'm reading about services, which is the phrase for a meal. You have a service, a lunch and a dinner usually. Some restaurants, of course, stay open all day. I'm hearing about restaurants in pretty much every category and calibre, from the high-end Michelin-starred stuff right down to your greasy spoons, simply not being able to serve the customers that they want to serve because they haven't got the bodies. I just want to hear from you. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Let's take a break from talking about petrol and lorries and haulage. Let's talk instead about restaurants and cafes and hotels. You've been very good to me over the years with the first-hand, straight in there testimony and evidence. I want good news as well. If you're doing fine, we'll take the call. But remember, as with chicken pox, just because you've never had it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So I think the producer gets increasingly frustrated by people ringing in to say, well, there's no shortages in my local budgeons, therefore this is all lies. If you've never had chicken pox, it doesn't mean that everybody who's had chicken pox was lying. Okay? So if there's no shortage where you are, it doesn't mean that everybody who's reporting shortages is lying. If you got some petrol this morning, it doesn't mean that every newspaper in the land and every photograph and every broadcast is untrue. And speaking of petrol stations, there's one up the road from me. I think Good Morning Britain have been there this morning because the lad who's drawn it to my attention is a producer there, Rav. Just up the road from where my mum lives in Kidderminster, in Chaddesley Corbett, a petrol station owner called Danny is opening for an extra 90 minutes every day just for key workers, and they're checking IDs in the queue. So all you need to do is have the ID to prove that you're a medic or a teacher or something similar. They'd normally be closed at 9 p.m, but they're opening up earlier. If that petrol station is the one I think it is, the one opposite the Fox Inn, just outside Chaddesley Corbett, then it certainly used to be owned by the father of a lad I went to school with. I wonder if Danny is his sister. It's a small world, isn't it? 11:15 is the time. No more petrol and haulage on this show, at least. I'm sure we'll be returning to it on LBC in the course of the day, and I'm sure I'll be back on it tomorrow if things don't improve too sweet. Let's do hotels now. Let's do restaurants. The catering industry has warned of, and this is the word I'm looking at, the sector, hospitality leaders have warned that the sector is, and I quote, close to imploding under the strain of acute labour shortages following Brexit and the COVID-19 pandemic. Number one, what does imploding look like in the hospitality sector? 0345 6060 973. And number two, as someone perhaps a little bit lower down the food chain than the signatories to this letter, although, you know how this show works, perfectly likely that some of the signatories to this letter will ring in as well. But people who didn't sign the letter to the Financial Times, how accurate is the description of your sector being, and I quote, close to imploding? And remember how I began this introduction, by just reminding you what happened when we decided to listen to Norman in Ongar, Nigel Farage and Digby Pudding-Jones instead of the people actually at the metaphorical coalfaces. Look what happened when we thought Andrea Leadsom knew about as much about the WTO as Pascal Lamy, a former Director General of the WTO. Look what happened when Sir Paul Nurse, the head of the Royal Society, explained what would happen with regard to science, and radio producers booked Andrew Bridgen to put forward the alternative. Look what happened. So this is what the experts are saying. Are we going to listen to them now? Here's an anecdote. A pal of mine went to a watch fair at one of the hotels near Heathrow at the weekend and was planning on settling down for a session with his fellow watch aficionado mates. But the shortages of staff in a hotel that was actually open was so acute that they left. They will wait, and this is the problem, because people will start taking it out on the managers and the staff that are there, but there simply weren't enough people to properly look after all of the customers in a relatively smart hotel. I don't think it was the hotel where the fair was actually held. I don't know the details, but anyway, that's an anecdote. That's not data. But if you find 1,000 of them, you've got a story. 20 minutes after 11, and the story today is that 65 hospitality leaders have warned the government that the entire sector is close to imploding under the strain of acute labour shortages. Darren's in Swindon. Darren, what would you like to say?
How you doing, James? You all right?
Pretty good, yeah. Well, I'm all right. I don't need labour shortages here. As long as there's someone to push the buttons and polish my bald patch every morning, we're good to go.
Excellent. I'm actually a hotel manager based in Swindon, you said before, and 4-star, 2 rows at fine dining, and after Brexit, I should say it was bad. Yeah. And I lost a lot of my workforce because I didn't feel comfortable. And I was speaking to some of their guests that came through, the patrons, I would say. And I'm saying to them, Brexit's a bit...
Have you got me on speaker?
Can you hear me now?
That's much better. That's much better. Go on.
Amazing. Sorry, I was multitasking. So, which I'm not very good at, by the way. So, after the Brexit situation, when it came to the team members, I tried to recruit. So they didn't feel comfortable from overseas and his agency. And they were saying, look, we want to come and help you. However, we don't feel certain how long we'll be here for, how to be treated. Yeah. And when I told other guests this as well, coming to stay with my establishments, they were saying, no, that's not real. Yeah, why can't we get some of the British guys over here? And I'm saying, they haven't got the mentality and don't want to do it. It's long hours, the payment's actually brilliant. But let's move things forward slightly now. So when it comes to the period now we're going through, is it's if not worse, because I can't actually... We're busy, because obviously no one's going abroad to do holidays and such, staying here, UK-wise. However, I can't actually look after guests I've already got booked, and I'm actually full. So team members like today, for instance, I'm at work at the present moment, saying, I don't want to be busy today. And I'm saying, why don't you busy for us? More tips, everything else. We can't actually look after them, Darren, because we haven't actually got...
Well, oddly, I didn't know that you were going to say that when you came on. And my mate was at a watch fair at the weekend, explained it really well, but it's hard to convey that you are open for business, but you are not providing the level of service that either you want to provide or that your guests expect, because there are not enough bodies in the building.
Correct. And I don't think people really get it. It's actually really worrying. Come Christmas time now...
don't worry. Boris is battling to save Christmas.
Gosh, he needs a big battle on his hands. The thing about it is, James, what's really worrying is that I want to be busy. I'm going to be busy this year as well. However, I don't think I can actually provide the service. And the amount of complaints I have, I end up giving the money I've earned away back to them.
To give refunds and to give compensation. And that's a much more live likelihood post TripAdvisor and all that malarkey. People are a lot more, not a bad thing necessarily, but they're a lot more aware of their rights and a lot more... a lot less British, really, when it comes to asking for refunds compared to 10 or 20 years ago. Do you recognise the phrase "close to imploding," Darren?
Yes, I do.
What does it mean in Swindon? What does it mean in your venues?
Okay, at the moment, Swindon at the moment is you can't recruit, but you want to recruit. If you do recruit, you can't keep making to stay, either you from overseas. Also, as well, when it comes now to the amount of revenue to come to the door, it's amazing. Yeah. We're busy. However, next week I've got to give what I've earned back. So the problem, what hopefully Boris can actually sort for everybody is,
yes,
which I would like him to do, is do temporary visas to a period of time now till the summer period, not just over Christmas.
Right through. So 12 months then, really.
Correct.
A 12-month visa might help, but a 3-month visa, well, it's going to be chucking them out on Christmas Eve, which is a nightmare for you. But a 4-month visa or a 3-month visa starting next month isn't going to touch the sides for you.
No, it won't.
Well, why would you come as well? I mean, to be, to feel second class and to. Some people come and they do a shift. They're not here to visit Alton Towers or to do anything like that. But a lot of people do want a quality of life as well as a livelihood. Darren, you've got it first up. I wish you well. I do. But that's interesting. A 12-month visa. Is it going to be this incremental reaching back to the equivalent of freedom of movement? You start with a 3-month visa. Yeah, then you get a 12-month visa. Then you get a 5-year visa. Then, look, no one's really paying attention anymore. Let's just call it mental freedom. And bring it back in again without acknowledging what a mistake it was to abolish it. I mean, it's like clockwork, isn't it? As we prepare to talk about the situation in hospitality and catering, I noticed some fairly grim warnings coming from Next, the retail chain, which, if memory serves, it's headed up by a bloke who was always on the telly in the run-up to the referendum telling us what a bang-up idea Brexit would be. So interesting how he's going to explain that to his board members. 11:34 is the time. Cleo Georgiadis is the hospitality director at a Greek restaurant, Estiatorio Milos, in central London, an exceptional restaurant. I bet they don't serve bum fritters down there. And she's also one of the signatories to this letter to the government warning that the sector is close to imploding. And she joins me on the line now. Cleo, many thanks for your time. Close to imploding is an apocalyptic phrase. It's a very strong phrase. Did you use it in the hope of spooking the government, of scaring the government into action, or would you describe it as being coolly accurate?
I would say it's frighteningly accurate, James. It feels a little bit like trying to hold a handful of sand right now.
Gosh.
And I think what's the most heartbreaking element is that after everything we've been through the last 18 months, open, closing, now the post-COVID confidence is restoring, but we don't have the staff, as your other callers have said, and Kate Nichols has been saying. So we're having to limit capacity. Operators are closing some days. If you're on 2 floors like we are,
yes.
When you don't have the bodies, and that's the heartbreaking thing, because the guests are coming back. They want to dine out. They want to book big tables. They want to be looked after. And usually staff on their knees.
That's incredible, actually. And Darren in Swindon describing the same thing. The knowledge as a caterer, as a scion of the hospitality industry, that you can't provide the level of service that you want and your customers expect. What's the tipping point then? I mean, I know obviously there's a point where you can't make a profit because you can't do enough covers, but the bigger the restaurant, the bigger the problem. What is for you personally in your restaurant the tipping point, if that's a question you can answer?
Well, I think after, we've been open just over 6 years, so it's taken time and effort to build a reputation, to build a clientele, to create a united team. And the second you feel that any of those are going to suffer, I guess that's a tipping point, and our rents don't change. And when you're only able to use, say, half a restaurant, I think the biggest point is that the misconception in this country that hospitality is a low-skilled, low-paid industry. It's not. It's really not. We're a bit of an exception because it's like you said, it's Greek. By the way, very good accent, James. Your Greek accent. Yeah. So no, it's highly skilled. A sommelier, who could be up to £40,000. That's highly skilled. Waiters are highly skilled.
This is an Anglo-Saxon disease, isn't it? Fred Sirieix has spoken about this as well, who, of course, famous now for his television work, but one of London's finest maitre d's. And I have, I hope, obviously, a lot of connections with Greece. And my friends there, when I was at university, when I started visiting there a lot, the there was no distinction in terms of status between the people that were coming to the London School of Economics to study international relations and the people who were perhaps going to hotel school in Switzerland, or the people who were going to be dedicated to the catering. No distinction at all. No higher or lower.
100%. And, you know, in the 60s and 70s, when all the Europeans came to this country and brought their diverse culture, their cuisine, their language, that's what made London so cosmopolitan. And that's what added to, you know, we moved from a pie and mash place to this incredible cuisine that everyone enjoyed and was integral to the appeal of London, not just for tourists, but mobile businesses. And I mean, you know, our business lunch is as important as our dinners. You know, you have meetings happening, and it's part of life. It's part of our everyday life, aside from the fact that it's also giving back to people. And that appeal is going to suffer if restaurants have to close because we don't have the bodies.
And I mean, you're not denying the necessity or the advantages of having a root and branch reform of the sector and the approach to the job, but equally you can't sit and wait for a new supply chain of domestically trained, better respected workers to arrive. So when the Home Office says we want to see employers make long-term investments in the UK domestic workforce instead of relying on labour from abroad, they've turned it into an either-or.
They have, but there's also a cultural issue that it was only then, when everyone came to this country, that it did become a profession to be proud
chicken
of.
and egg, isn't it, to coin a catering analogy?
I think what would help is if the skilled shortage list, if they add some hospitality roles onto that, because there are none on the skilled shortage list.
Right.
And if they do that, then some restaurants at least have the chance to be able to sponsor people to come from overseas.
And there'd be you'd want to see reduced visa fees as well, presumably, or just to make it attractive. And what about the timescale on the visas you refer to, or on some special dispensation ones? Because I think it's fair to say that the invitation to European lorry drivers to come here and work for 3 months has not been snapped up with much alacrity on the continent. So what might work in your sector?
I think if you put a time limit on a visa, then you're telling people that we don't really want you. So I think people have to be looked at in terms of their skills, their training, their history, and their eligibility to fill a certain role within a company. So, I mean, it's really scary, and that's why this letter, you know, all those operators on it, you know, it got to the stage. Everyone's crying to each other, panicking, sending business away, not knowing how they're going to see it through. And it really is a huge problem.
Well, I suppose all you can do is to carry on shouting while also squeezing in the small matter of having to run big businesses and restaurants and hotels and catering empires as well, looking at the 65 signatories. Cleo Georgiadis, many thanks, Cleo, as I say, the hospitality director at the Greek restaurant Estiatorio Milos. And that thing, just simple things like that are so helpful to understand, having 2 floors and thinking, well, soon we won't be able to open the second floor. You know, soon we won't be able to open at lunchtime, as I think as Albert Roux has been Michel Roux has been down that route already, or at Le Gavroche. And listen, before you start going, oh, who cares, they're all really posh restaurants, the bloke who founded Pret-a-Manger signed this as well, and it's not that long ago that all the tub-thumping Brexiters were banging on about why we had to stop working from home in case Pret-a-Manger went bust. Funny, isn't it, that it's almost like they have absolutely no consistency or honesty in their analysis of the news. It depends entirely on the colour of the scarf that they've tied around the neck. Well, I'll tell you what colour my scarf is. My scarf is the colour of the UK. If you care about this country, then all the damage that has been done to it unnecessarily should make your blood curdle like it does mine. And it's not that hard to break out of the mindset you've been tempted into by 6 years of bogus rhetoric and ludicrous media coverage. All you've got to do is stick your head out the window, open your eyes, have a look around, and then ask the people who are shouting their complaints what their complaints have been caused by. 11:42 is the time. Thank you. Mark's in Horsham. Back to the catering question, Mark. What would you like to say?
Yeah, hi, James. Thanks for having me on the programme. I'm a Remainer, and I thoroughly regret us leaving Europe. But I think that we're in the situation where we just now have to get on with playing the game with the cards we've been dealt with. And that means for all businesses working locally, which most businesses do, they've got a local market. They're they're providing goods or services to, they have to look to the local labour pool, and they have to pay appropriately to recruit. It's a competitive marketplace.
But so, you've seen, the problems here, and it's a well-rehearsed argument. I haven't got a great deal of patience with it, but I've got a great deal more patience as a person than I used to. So I'll run through it with you and see whether either of us can spot any flaws in what the other person is saying.
Yeah.
The ones you're going to tempt to do the jobs that we're talking about today are currently doing jobs.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen to the jobs they vacate to go and do the jobs that you think need to be made more competitive is point one. Point two is the haulage industry was offering people golden geese even not long ago, and it's barely touched the sides. The increased wages, the increased offers has barely touched the sides, and we've already had stories of people giving up their work driving bin lorries to go and drive supermarket lorries, which means that last week in some parts of the country the bins weren't being emptied.
No, I thoroughly agree with all that.
And finally, you just heard Cleo say that, that there are, and particularly at her end of the sector, these are highly paid jobs. These are decent gigs that are prized by people who've grown up countries where hospitality is respected and regarded as a proper career. We live in a country where, for the domestic population, it isn't. So where are you going to get a 40 grand a year sommelier from by the weekend, Mark?
I think that what you're going to have to do is you're going to be poaching it from someone else's restaurant. That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
There are going to be businesses. There are going to be.
So then you're not filling a gap, are you? You're not alleviating a labour shortage by poaching someone else's sommelier. You're just moving. You're moving the shortage from one restaurant to another.
Yeah, exactly. But the situation is there will be some businesses that will not survive because there isn't the labour to enable them. But
they would survive if we brought back freedom of movement of people.
Yes, but then we have the situation.
So when you say we have to deal with the cards,
let me just say.
Of course.
Then you have the situation where we, and as Emily Maitlis pointed out last night on Newsnight, you have bad employers who will take advantage of people who are coming in from Europe who will settle for a lower wage. So it's a combination.
What do you think this Europe is? I didn't see Newsnight last night. That sounds an unlikely intervention from Emily.
It was a fantastic.
What do you think Europe is? Who are all these French people that have to come here to work for a pittance? The Italian people, the Spanish people, the Polish people. The most scant economic comparisons between these countries now. The point you make had a relevance during that initial accession of the Eastern European countries, but it doesn't anymore, Mark. It's 10 years, 15 years out of date, that argument, and it wasn't particularly good then. And as you know, and I know you're not in this category, it was usually deployed by racists who were lying about having concerns about the working conditions of foreigners when, in fact, they just didn't want any foreigners here at all, as became clear during the course of the referendum campaign. So that doesn't work as an argument either.
Well, no, I think it does because there are people who are employed on contracts.
Just go and have a look at the money that's available, the size of the gaps. You find one Romanian who might be coming here to work for money that you wouldn't be prepared to work for, or British people wouldn't be able to work for. You find one example like that, and you somehow extrapolate from that an explanation for the haulage industry, the retail industry, the catering industry, the hospitality industry, all being on their knees. And it is here, right in front of me, as you speak. The fashion and homeware chain Next has warned it may struggle to deliver its normal service in the run-up to Christmas unless the UK government relaxes post-Brexit migration restrictions to allow more workers into the country. I'm afraid, for me at least, the idea that this situation has been caused by low-paid Europe. I mean, it was rejected by the Bank of England, God forbid. And I did begin this hour by urging everybody to stop thinking that, I mean, in that case, it would have been Mark Carney or the Bank of England were somehow an equal and opposite force to Andrew Bridgen or Mark Francois. If you want to understand the economy, talk to the best economists you can find. Maybe don't get Andrew Bridgen on the phone. Everybody in the hospitality industry seems to be united in the problems they currently face, but there will, of course, be lots of people nowhere near the hospitality industry that think all the people in the hospitality industry must therefore be wrong. The challenge, and we are still, I can't believe it, we're still a lonely little canoe paddling up the creek on this programme. The challenge, of course, is for the rest of the media to wake up to the fact that you don't balance out people who know what they're talking about by inviting on a guest who doesn't know what they're talking about. 11:52 is the time. So how bad is it? And this phrase, close to imploding, how accurate is it? Adam is in Bristol. Adam, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Well, first of all, first-time caller, a big fan as well, so thanks for having me on.
Welcome.
But in terms of the last caller, and I mean the whole sentiment around the implosion, I think we're very close, dangerously close. And we're paying our team now in my establishment as a cohort more than I've paid any team I've ever managed in my career. So I think to say that we're not paying enough, and we've been paying recruiters to bring people in. I mean, you can poach from other restaurants, but really, as you said, it doesn't solve the problem. And those people you bring across, they're ready to jump ship for.
I mean, there's also the Lord Farquhar element of what the last lad said about, well, if some companies have to go under, that's just the price we're going to have to pay. So misrepresent the reality. Disregard the expert analysis, and then say, well, if some companies go bust, that's a price worth paying. I tell you, if that bloke voted Remain, I'm Gordon the Gopher.
Well, yeah, I mean, as well, a lot of the people we have, I mean, you referenced TripAdvisor earlier, and what should be a great tool for the industry is turning into a bit of a minefield.
Because this is the recurring thing. You can't provide the service you want to provide.
Essentially, yes. And the people who, dare I say, go to TripAdvisor to pen their reviews in a negative light are the people who wanted more British people working in the hospitality sector, wanted to be served by Brits at the table side. But the work ethic just isn't there, James. Just as an example, the attendance record at the moment from our team is appalling. These people, they don't see what they're doing as a career. It's a stepping stone. Part-time people, students, or people just unsure as to what they want to do.
And that
next.
is something we should be able to improve, is what Cleo was saying. But you're not going to fix that by the weekend or Christmas or even this time next year. That is you'll like this, because this speaks to exactly what you describe. Emma says, I remember at school, when I worked in a school, the head of sixth form funneling those she considered to be duffers into the travel and tourism BTEC rather than what she considered to be the worthier courses. She even taught the damn travel and tourism course. Her contempt for the kids was palpable. And that is a nationwide cultural problem that will take a generation to fix. If it is indeed fixable. If it is fixable.
I think we don't put enough respect in the industry. I mean, we don't respect people that work in hospitality. It was a problem, whereas now we're starting to understand that we need to respect these people, and it's a highly skilled trade, ultimately.
Yeah, I don't like asking this question, actually, but it's important to get all the facts, all the truth out there. What does the light at the end of the tunnel look like? You can be as imaginative as you want, Adam.
Well, I mean, if I had the TARDIS, I'd go back in time and avoid the referendum.
Freedom of movement, then. In other words, freedom of movement of people.
Yeah,
do you know, I wonder, I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but do you think we could end up in a place where we do bring back freedom of movement for everybody else in Europe, but we just don't have it ourselves?
I mean, that's one option. I mean, yeah, it's an option, but then why are we in this situation in the first place? We're in the situation, we need to find a solution, but I don't think we're exploring all possible options.
No, well, and that's why I'm told that we should have some optimism, or at least cross our fingers about this new committee that's been set up with reported in the Caterer with a lot of your industry leaders working with government to address some of these issues. But then, of course, in the next breath, I'll remind you what the Home Office said in response to this letter. We are closely monitoring labour supply and working with sector leaders to understand how we can best ease particular pinch points. Well, it doesn't look that way from here.